Hello, and welcome back to Trying to Figure It Out. This week, we're going to be diving into all things polyamory. I have on with me a polyamory expert with over a decade of experience. Dr. Badiee, welcome to Trying to Figure It Out.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm very excited that you're here. So you are a licensed psychologist and professor. You've published so many academic papers on polyamory. You offer therapy to clients seeking polyamory guidance. You teach undergraduate and graduate level courses, and you offer workshops and consulting services as well. You certainly have a lot of things on your plate.
That's correct, yes.
So you were born in Iran and grew up in Texas. What were your parents' views on relationships and monogamy at the time?
So my parents, we're all, like you said, first generation immigrants from Iran, which tends to be a very conservative culture. They've changed a lot now, but growing up, they definitely carried those parts of the very conservative culture. Always very supportive, very loving. I was very lucky that I had so much love, but definitely there was some conservative attitudes about queerness for sure and gender when I was growing up. So it was pretty much I was only exposed to monogamy.
Right. What were your dating experiences like when you were growing up?
My dating experiences, so I like up until my 30s, I mostly dated men. And I tried to fit into monogamous relationships, but I would always fail. I would never live up to the expectations. Like I remember one time, my first boyfriend got so mad at me because he asked me if I liked attention, and I said yes, and he said that was slutty. So I felt like I really tried to fit into monogamy, but I couldn't. Mm-hmm. And then when I was like in my 30s, I started more coming out as polyamorous and dating other genders as well.
Mm-hmm. What did it look like when you were like trying to fit into monogamous relationships but couldn't? What were like some of the things that you were experiencing, or like the things that you were starting to notice that made you think that monogamy wasn't right for you?
For me, I was always really like in love with the person I was with, and sometimes I would be in a situation that was in a different place, and I would feel very present, and like maybe and a person there would kiss or something when I was younger, especially when I was more impulsive when I was younger. So that would be something that obviously like within most monogamous relationships is not okay. And so I would immediately always tell the person, like I never ever lied about it, but the whole relationship would be rewritten as if it was all a lie. And it was very confusing to me because I thought it's like it had nothing to do with my feelings for that person. I was somewhere totally different. Like I wasn't even thinking about that person. So like to me, it wasn't related, but I would feel so guilty and so ashamed. And so I think, so those were like some of the ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. So you started officially identifying as polyamorous in 2011. When did you begin to learn more about polyamory, and how did you decide to use that label for yourself?
Around 2009, the Salon, a digital media site, they published a series of articles on non-monogamy, and I remember there was one entitled Why I Hate Monogamy. I looked for it and it's not there anymore, unfortunately. It was from a woman. She had like basically embraced having multiple partners, embraced that she could fall in love with multiple partners. And it was a woman owning her sexuality in a way that I had never really witnessed, and owning her non-monogamy. And I never had seen that. And, so that was like my first exposure, and I sent it to like everybody. I was looking at my email. I like sent it to everybody that I knew at the time because it just blew my mind, and that you could do this. Because I was thinking like maybe I won't get into a relationship again because I don't want to hurt anyone. And I obviously not good at this. So it was such a light bulb moment, and then I just learned more about it. At the time, I didn't have any community around me, but I started to like look for resources and find different things. So, but that was really like what really sparked the journey.
Right. Before we get into what you do with your clients, I want to lay the groundwork about what polyamory is and just kind of dive into language a little bit. So, what is polyamory versus polygamy?
So polyamory is one type of non-monogamy because there's lots of different types of non-monogamy, but basically it's usually characterized by multiple loves. Like the root poly is multiple amor in Latin is love. So basically there's this idea that you have space to fall in love with multiple people, to have emotional commitments with multiple people, romantic connections with multiple people, rather than strictly like sexual connections. So that's how you define polyamory. Polygamy is generally characterized with also like a legal marriage as well, which is not legal in the U.S. In most places, they don't allow for like civil unions of more than one person or marriages. But it's more linked with that. So there are societies that do allow that. So, but the U.S. isn't one of them. So polyamory tends to be more like the direction that people go in. Yeah.
Got it.
Also, polyamory, I would say, that has a connotation of equality as well. Whereas like some forms of non-monogamy have allowed for people that are men to be non-monogamous, but not necessarily like other genders. So one thing that's unique about polyamory is it's based on equality, and like generally genders have equal access to partners.
Right. What does it mean to be non-monogamous versus polyamorous?
So non-monogamous is basically an umbrella term, which and a lot of different identities could fit into non-monogamy. It just means that you are not practicing strict monogamy. So it could be a whole range of ways that you do that. So polyamory is one type of non-monogamy. So people can identify as, both as well. But when someone says I'm non-monogamous, that doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what kind of structure they have. It could be a more polyamorous structure, but it could also be maybe more of like a swinger structure or something combined. So, so everybody like defines it how they, what fits for them.
Got it. Can you walk me through what polyamorous relationships can look like?
Absolutely. So polyamorous relationships, I mean, they can take really infinite forms, I think. Being polyamorous just means that you have multiple partners, right? So that's all. It could be 2, could be 3, could be, I've heard of people having like 11 partners, which I'm like, I don't know how, like but I admire you, like that you can do that. But there's people that have, a lot of partners. Also, it depends on how often you see the partners, obviously, too, like, because some people are what's referred to as comets, so people that you don't see that often, maybe they live somewhere else, but you consider them very dear and a partner, but they're not someone you see very often. So someone can just have multiple, as many partners as they can, and then people can have any kinds of combinations within that. Like there could be 3 people, like a triad or a thruple that are in relationships with each other. There could be a quad, which is 4 people in relationships with each other. There could be, and it could expand beyond that.
So not every polyamorous relationship is a thruple. It can be that you, as a polyamorous person, have a boyfriend and a girlfriend at the same time, and they don't technically need to be together either.
Exactly. Like for me, I have one partner. I have 2 partners. They're really good friends, and they love to gang up on me and tease me, and like, but they are not together in any way. We have fun together. Sometimes, like the 3 of us, there's certain activities we like to do together, but we're definitely not a thruple. So I think that's maybe the most common perception, I think, is a thruple. But interestingly enough, I don't know if that's the most common type of like long-term polyamorous configuration. It's actually a complicated structure.
Yeah.
It's like polyamory, advanced polyamory, to try to do a thruple, because you're not just you don't just have connections. So you have connections with each person between each of the 2, and then you have like the triad. So you have to make time for like connections with the 2 people you're with, and then connections for like the thruple as a whole, and then obviously like time for yourself as well. So it can be done, and there's really beautiful thruples, and people can have great experiences, but it's definitely, I think, more of an advanced one. But it's one that people often want to try first.
Right. Okay, so let's say you're in a polyamorous relationship, or you are polyamorous and you're in a relationship with 2 people. Do those 2 people technically need to label themselves as polyamorous, or can they just be open, like they're into open relationships? Like, do they need to identify or label themselves?
No, those are called mono-poly relationships.
Got
So someone that's monogamous is in a relationship with someone that's polyamorous, and there's like a Facebook group for people that are in those types of relationships. So definitely it's not a requirement. I mean, some people may prefer to date polyamorous people, obviously, just like monogamous people might prefer to date monogamous people, but it definitely can be done.
Mm-hmm. Are open relationships a form of polyamory?
Typically, open relationships are considered to be sexually non-monogamous. So people can identify their relationship as open and polyamorous. Sometimes people might identify both. But typically, like how open is characterized as like there's some room for sexual non-monogamy, but not necessarily the emotional non-monogamy.
Right.
Whereas in polyamory, you have the emotional or romantic part as well.
Right. If you are polyamorous and you're in a relationship with two people, and let's say one of those people in the relationship and you break up, do you stay with one of the other? Like, what is like the structure of how that works in terms of like, do you stay with the other person and then you're open to other people coming into the relationship? How does that dynamic work?
So you're referring to like if they're all together, like in like a thruple or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So that honestly depends. Sometimes if the relationship has longer term, like if that might be the one that survives, but that's not always the case. Like I've had friends that, they were the married partner and they were the long-term partner of like over a decade, but the people that were more short-term ended up staying. So it really just depends. I think, people try to have conversations around it and talk about like, what does this mean?
Right.
And if it's a couple that's very like entrenched together, there's something called couples privilege, which is like, especially if you're married and living together, you have certain privileges that come along with that. So sometimes like with couples privilege, maybe they're going to protect the couple at all costs. And then that person that's newer kind of gets pushed to the side, unfortunately,
right.
Completely. So it depends. But I mean, I think ethically, hopefully there could be open conversations about it and people can express what they would like. And the
right.
relationships might just take a different form or they might just sever all the ties.
Right. So for your specific situation, you mentioned that you have two partners and they are not in a relationship. So you are not in a throuple. So my question for you is, let's say you want to move in with your partners or, settle down and get to the point of potential marriage or anything like that. What does that look like for you? And maybe on a broader scale, what does that look like for, maybe a different polyamorous relationship?
So that's a great question. So my male partner and I, Sina, we are actually legally married and we do live together and we have 2 dogs. My female partner, Rikisha, my lady friend, as I refer to her, she does not live with me. She lives pretty close, like 10 minutes away with her daughter and her 2 cats. So for us, like it works great because she doesn't have a desire to live with a partner. She's what's referred to as solo polyamorous. So solo polyamorous people prefer to live alone. They prefer not to, we call it like nesting with a partner. Like they prefer not to live with a partner, not necessarily get legally married. They really value their own independence and are really like, often consider themselves like their own primary partner. So that's how she is. She's like very independent. She very much likes her space, but I see her twice a week and it's great for all of us because like we both know we're not compatible with living together, but like I'm more compatible with my male partner, but I like that we're all close, right. Physically, like that's nice. So,
So you have a male partner and a female partner. Are they both, I know one is solo polyamorous. And then is your male partner polyamorous as well? Does he have other partners separate from you?
Yes, he does. He also is. So we all identify as polyamorous, yes, but he also has partners as well. Absolutely.
Got it. How do you navigate like potential feelings of jealousy? How do you define the difference between feeling jealous to the point where you realize maybe you aren't polyamorous versus jealousy is just a normal human emotion that anyone experiences in any relationship?
That's a great question. I think for me, and everybody's experience is different, but I think for me, I really started to identify as polyamorous separate from any relationship. So I always knew that was the direction I wanted to go in, and that my values were that, like I believe that nobody owns my body. I believe I should have freedom over it. It just fits for me in a lot of ways, spiritually, emotionally. When I got in a relationship with my male partner, he was never that jealous, but I was jealous at first. Even though I knew this is what I wanted to do. So it was just lots of conversation. At the beginning, I wasn't that great at handling my emotions around it. So I would be mean sometimes. I feel like, I didn't communicate really well, but luckily, we had a really strong foundation, and we also decided that we were going to be monogamous at first. So for about a year or so, we were monogamous. So then once we did become polyamorous officially, we were able to really talk through those things because we already had that foundation.
How do you know when polyamory is right for you then?
Ask yourself, do I have the ability to fall in love with more than one person? That's the first question. Can I see myself, being emotionally, it doesn't have to be love, because people could be aromantic and polyamorous. So, but can I see myself having emotional commitments to more than one person? That's obviously the first foundation. So if you know that, then okay, I know that I'm capable of this, and at least it gives you a starting point. Right. Then the second question is, can you see yourself having your partner date other people? And if not, can you see yourself working on it to get there? And also, are you willing to do the work that it takes? Because you have to navigate so many more things. You have to discuss everything. Everyone has different boundaries, different ways that they might approach it, different things that might make them feel safe. So you really have to talk through all those things.
What does it look like having kids if you are polyamorous?
This is where I get to where does monogamy come from? So in the U.S., indigenous cultures and also the Africans that were brought here were non-monogamous. I mean, the idea of it takes a village to raise a child comes from Africa. So they already had these non-monogamous structures, but then when European colonizers came, they basically imposed this very heteronormative, way that only the nuclear family should be the ones raising the child. So for a lot of us that are polyamorous, it feels like going back to our roots to say oh, actually there's multiple loving, how could that be bad? Multiple loving people in this child's life. And the research shows that kids are only helped by polyamorous relationships. There's a really good researcher named Dr. Eli Sheff, and she does a lot of research on people that are polyamorous with kids and long-term relationships, and it really just enhances their lives, because there's more people to spoil them, there's more people to love them, there's more people to teach them lessons, more people to do also just the nitty and gritty stuff that you have to do with kids.
Right.
So it really can enhance I think the upbringing of a child. My lady friend has a child that's she's 11, and she is just so great, and I consider her my bonus kid. She and I have our own special relationship, and we have talked about if we ever were to break up, which we can't see because we're life partners, but we would give her the choice of staying connected to me or not. So right. You can talk about those things, but I think it's more adults that can love the child.
Right. What are some of the emotional challenges that come with kids being involved in polyamory?
So the emotional challenges can definitely be that obviously having a child together is a really big deal, right? And so the two people that are biologically having that child, there could be a lot more time spent together, a lot more planning, a lot more investment together. So that can definitely, for other people that are partners with either one of them, that could bring up feelings of jealousy, difficult feelings. And there are situations where, let's say someone is infertile themselves and they see their partner doing it, it might be too painful for them that they can't continue that relationship sometimes. But hopefully if everybody's able to talk and talk about how can we look at this together, what is my relationship going to be to this child? Because some people really go in with we're all equal parents. It doesn't doesn't matter biologically whose child it is. So some people have that perspective, like they're all parents, but definitely, like, obviously people can feel left out. So in polyamory, you just talk through those feelings, and sometimes like going to therapy, journaling, those kinds of things like can really help as well.
For sure. So in your situation, are you open to finding new partners currently?
No one is closed in our dynamic. So everyone's free to date. Everyone's free to, pursue partners. But I personally just don't have a lot of extra time. My two partners are life partners for me. So they're both I'm committed to them, both of them deeply, and really nurturing those relationships. So that might change at some point, like maybe like my career, if it gets maybe less busy at some time, I don't know, I don't know when, but then maybe I might be open to another partner. Not that I wouldn't like maybe have fun with somebody or something like that, but not necessarily like have a serious partner. Like I just can't imagine that right now with the way that my time is. But when my partners date other people, I get so excited now. Like I'm like, ooh, I get almost like more excited than them sometimes. So like, okay, I gotta calm down.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
it's called compersion, by the way.
Oh, can you please define that for me?
Sure. So compersion is the feelings of joy and happiness that you get when your partner's with someone else. Or, your partner's with someone else because you're just happy that they're being loved. You're happy that they're being taken care of. You're happy that they're happy. So like when I see my partner smiling about someone, it's so lovely. Like I just get so, I like get giddy with them because I'm like, just because I'm not bringing that smile, like I'm happy they're happy, So yeah, I just love seeing her happy, even if it's not with me, and like tomorrow we could end this relationship, but I'll still be happy that we had this love and that, so every day we choose each other. I think that's another really awesome thing about polyamory. Like, you choose each other every day. There's no like, oh, we have to stay together because we have this like legally binding thing or, so not that it would end that abruptly or anything like that, but it's like just it's really taught me to like be present and, be really, just have a lot of joy.
That's amazing. I love that. So in a situation where you are feeling like you're not getting enough from your partner or you feel like one of your needs aren't being met, how do you handle that situation without it coming across as jealous or other forms of emotion?
So first of all, I will say jealousy is okay. People think that polyamorous people don't get jealous. That's not true. Polyamorous people get jealous. Obviously some people don't, but some monogamous people don't get jealous either. So it's just, there's a whole spectrum, right? The difference is how we respond to jealousy. So like as a therapist, like I work with clients to accept their emotions, to embrace them. So we see this jealousy in the same way. Like we're not trying to avoid it. We try to just talk about it. So I think with jealousy, what I encourage people to do, I just try to sit with it and say, what is this jealousy trying to tell me?
Right.
Maybe it's a need not being met, like you said. Maybe it's that I want more time, so I have to first sit with it and see like, okay, what is it telling me? Because when I was younger, I would just react. But another thing that's really important that I've learned in polyamory is, a lot of times people only have discussions when they're in conflict, when something comes up, which is a terrible time.
I think that's true in general.
In general, yeah, it's a terrible time to have discussions. You're activated, like you're heated, your brain's not even like completely like able to process everything that's going on sometimes. So what I do with my partners is we do check-ins monthly. We put it in the calendar, a time that we both agree on. We make sure at the beginning, like neither one of us is hungry, angry, hungry, angry, lazy, tired, right? So make sure we're not those, like we're feeling okay. And then it's so much easier to do check-ins and to talk about things when you're coming from that calm place, that compassionate place, when you're feeling okay. You don't have to feel like great, but at least feeling like okay. So that's when a lot of those things come up. So before it would come up like just in conflict, but now like when we do those check-ins, and there's a really good format. There's a podcast called Polyamory, and they have a format, a worksheet. It's called Radar that gives like a good kind of sample way to do check-ins in lots of different areas, and it gives like a nice format to check in.
So as a therapist, when you are helping a client who is struggling with emotions of jealousy, which can be normal, at what point do you as a professional start to, pick up on things that are maybe signs that this person is not polyamorous?
That's a great question. So first of all, just directly asking, like, right? So for me as a therapist, like, do you feel like this is still working for you? Like, how is this still working? I would probably ask something like, how does this jealousy fit into your overall perception of polyamory? Like, as far as how do you know if it's too much? I think everybody has to sort of figure that out for themselves, right? Because I think it comes down to like your values and what you want in your life. There are also people that are ambiamorous, which means they can be either polyamorous or monogamous. Whereas some people like me, like it's part of my identity. So regardless of my relationships, I'm always polyamorous. It's just who I am, or it could be like an orientation. So I think it comes down to like, is it an identity for you? Is it something that you like is really important for you to have? Is the jealousy, at least the responses to it, getting better over time, right? Because like when you make progress, like in therapy, any kind of growth, it's, one step forward, two steps back, right? But like hopefully when you look back at the long-term trajectory, like you can see there's generally progress and it's getting better. So like if somebody's continuing to be jealous, continue to be activated, and it's not getting better, then at that point, maybe it's time to like think about, okay, is this really for you? Because there should be like maybe like 6 months of work on yourself, a year of work. Either maybe you're with someone, you're not in a relationship that you can feel safe being polyamorous, because that's also the case too. Or maybe you're just not polyamorous.
Yeah. As a therapist, what do you think is important for partners to consider before entering a poly relationship?
Consider like, what rituals do you have currently in your relationship? What are ways that you can stay connected? First, like establishing that foundation of communication skills, learning to talk through the difficult things before you even go into polyamory. Like, I think it's really okay to take it slow, and I think it's best to go at the pace of the slowest person. I mean, obviously there's limits to that, like if you're waiting years and the person's not, but generally you want to go as slow as the slowest person so they feel comfortable. So I would say like just go slow and do little things apart, talk about how this feels, read polyamorous books together. Like I've had clients that read like a chapter together and then they talk about it, and so you can do things like that, and that's also exploring your polyamory and like imagining how it could feel, rather than like, I think a lot of people just get excited and they just want to jump in, but it's like, it's hard, so I think you want to go in with like setting yourself up for success. So even though it is exciting, it's better to like go slower, and then you can have more of a chance to see if it's right for you. So like you don't even get to that place, hopefully, because you'll know before that.
Right. So what are some common issues that clients come and see you for?
Jealousy, maybe also like just coming to terms with it for themselves and like what it means for them, exploring like what kinds of relationships they want, like what would be their ideal relationship configuration. And that's sometimes hard to know, but like to the extent that they can say, they might be able to just say even just a little bit. So I think that's really important to like understand yourself as a polyamorous person, to understand your trauma, different levels of trauma, right? Because there's the traumas we think of, but there's also like racial trauma. There's also like trauma there's like environmental trauma. So like all these different traumas could very well be activated in polyamory. Right. So it's important to start doing some of that work. I think just, getting to know yourself. How
can boundaries or rules help in a poly relationship? Or actually, is it better to just not have rules and boundaries? Like, is that part of what it is?
No, definitely better. Some people think that that's what it is, and some people try to, say that, but, everybody has things that make them feel safe, because boundaries are just, what do I need to feel safe, right? Like physical space, what do I need emotionally? What do I need to feel safe, right? So I think boundaries apply to any kind of relationship. As far as with polyamory in particular, like boundaries, a lot of times when people start out, they might have like pretty strict boundaries, like, when then maybe they say things like, well, you can never have a partner come over to our house, for example. Like if we live together, you can never have someone come over. Or like, they might say like, oh, you can get emotionally tied, but don't fall in love, these kinds of things, which is kind of hard, right? But a lot of times people want, because it's scary, so they want to contain it as much as they can. And sometimes you do need that sometimes to feel safe,
right?
Especially if you're coming in as a couple. Like if you're starting like solo, it's a little bit different of a situation, right? Because you probably are going to do a lot of this work on yourself. And definitely like, boundaries for safety, like for sexual protection, those kinds of things are obviously, for health reasons. But I think like for a lot of polyamorous people that have been polyamorous for a while, as you progress more and more, you get to know yourself, you get more comfortable, you have less jealousy, you tend to have less boundaries. Boundaries and rules are very different, because boundaries is about what makes me feel safe. Rules is like, you need to do this. In polyamory, we try to stay away from rules and more like boundaries, because it's more like declaring like, these are my needs.
Yeah. If I'm in a monogamous relationship and I think I might want to try polyamory, how would you suggest that I bring that up to my partner?
So I suggest like doing some of your own research, like trying to maybe join some polyamorous groups on Facebook, or like just look up some resources. There's books out there, so you have an understanding of maybe some idea of like what you would want. And then maybe just sit down and like have a check-in conversation about relationships and talk about like how do you see commitment? What does commitment mean to you? Do you see monogamy as part of that commitment? And I think first just starting with like an open conversation. I think polyamory and non-monogamy are stigmatized so much that there are sometimes people that they might feel like that relationship is now forever changed just from bringing it up. Even if the person says like, I don't want to do polyamory, it's still scary because they might say like, well, I don't even want to be with you now that you even brought it up.
Right.
So that's why I think it's important to maybe sit with it with yourself a little bit and be like, is this something that, knowing that my partner, if I never mentioned this before, my partner might not be okay, am I still okay with that? Is that something that I would like to pursue? Or is it something that like, no, I'm okay, like I'm curious, but I'm okay, like I'm happy with my partner and it's not that serious for me. I think I would first like explore it for myself first, and then just have a general conversation.
So in your experience, how are poly relationships accepted or stigmatized in the queer community and in society in general?
In the queer community, we have this concept called queering it up, where it's like, you kind of take the norms and you shake them up a bit. So that could be like, shaking up gender norms in relationships, things like that. So I think in queer communities, it can definitely be more accepted generally, but some people want to say like, oh, let's be respectable so we get acceptance from society. So sometimes there could be stigma within the queer community, like, well, people already say we're deviant. People already say, we're promiscuous. So like you're adding to that. Like I've heard that response as well. But I would say generally, I think in the queer community, it's more accepted. In larger society, not so much. I think there's just a lot of misinformation out there about polyamory. People think it's just a sexual thing. Both my relationships are equally important to me. Like they're both my life partners, and it's not like one person's like a side person or something like that.
Right.
So I think there's just a lot of misinformation, and obviously like with legal benefits. So like let's say, when I like had a health issue, like only one partner can generally come with me, to an appointment, even though like it would be nice to have both partners there sometimes. Absolutely. So there's things like that. It's not, I wouldn't say it's like a, as oppressed, like it's not, like queerness or something like that, but there are ways that like your relationships get, minimized. There's ways that, they're not accepted. There's ways that like people make assumptions about you. So I think there's definitely still a lot of stigma.
Yeah. Okay, so at the end of every episode, I do something called Alpiece 3. It's basically my way of incorporating music into the podcast because it's always fun to end on a light note. So can you give me 3 songs that you think fit into the topic we touched on today, or just 3 of your favorite songs?
Yeah, so Can't Help But Fly is a really beautiful song. It's actually called the Poly song in parentheses. So
really?
Yeah, it's very good. And then No Promises also is a really good song about like just, you know, we're going to be in love, but there's no promises. Like, and then Hold the Girl is a really good one about like that the artist wrote after a therapy session. So it's all about like holding your inner child and just, you know, really caring for yourself. So I would say those three, because self-care and like nourishing yourself is very, very important in polyamory. So
thank you. Yeah. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Dr. Badiee. You are truly amazing. I think everything you shared with me and my listeners today is so helpful. And I want to ask you before we wrap, if you have any resources you'd recommend to my listeners after listening to this episode, if they have questions or if therapy is not something that they are capable of affording, what resources would you recommend to anyone listening who would like to learn more or maybe get help themselves?
Absolutely. So there's two books that I really, really like. One is the Polyamory Devotional, which is by Avita Sawyers. And that one, it's basically for every day of the year, it has like a little passage about something related to polyamory. So it's like a good one to just, you have something to do each day. It's like a good year-long thing. And then another one that I really like is Polysecure, which is about polyamory, but also about like figuring out your own attachment style. And then she has a new book that author also has a new book called Polywise, which goes a bit deeper into polyamory as well. So those would probably be the three books that I would recommend the most.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, thank you so much again for coming out here. We really appreciate it. And to my listeners, thank you so much for listening. I love you all, and we will see you next week with another exciting episode.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.